All right. Well, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Pierce Dispatch. Today, we are talking about a very important topic in the industry, PTSD, with my friend Conrad Weaver from Emmitsburg, Maryland. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yes, it is great to have you. And can you just share a little bit? What is your background with PTSD in the firefighting industry?
Yeah, so I'm a filmmaker. I tell stories. I'm a podcast host. And well, I live in Emmitsburg, Maryland. So I've been for the last nearly 20 years, I've lived there. And so I live right down the street from the National Fallen Firefighter Memorial, the National Emergency Training Center, right down the street from Station 6, which Pierce has built a whole bunch of engines and trucks for that station. So I've been hanging out with those guys off and on for the last 20 years. Actually produced a documentary about Station 6 and their history. But so about 6 years ago, I was working on a documentary. It was about the opioid crisis. And so I was doing ride-alongs with fire and EMS services. I was doing ride-alongs with law enforcement and just to learn more about addiction and overdoses. And one day we were on an overdose scene and it was a fatal overdose and not anything that I was ready for. But the medics and the police officers on scene were just like, it's just Tuesday, normal everyday thing for them. And I was like, how does this not bother you? It was a horrible scene. And I was just like, okay. So I started doing research. Okay. How does traumatic scenes affect first responders? And uncovered this whole issue of PTSD in the first responder community. And I thought, I went back to the officer I was with that day and I said, hey, do you guys like suffer from PTSD? And she was like, oh, you only knew the half of it. And then she said, if you want to make a movie about that, I'll do anything I can to help you. And what she didn't realize is that she would become one of the main characters in the movie, the PTSD 911. And so for the next 3 years, I connected with first responders from across the country. We have a firefighter out of Anaheim, California, who's kind of the main character in the film, Matty Fiorenza. And we followed his journey, wherever it was going to take us. I didn't know where that would take us and in his stories. And so we dive deep into that subject matter about how trauma and how these things affect first responders.
Certainly. And such a heavy topic. And I'm really eager to hear more about your experiences because you come at it with such a unique angle and such an indirect approach to addressing this topic is how you became aware of it. And I feel like that's how people in the industry almost become aware of it is indirectly. Like, hey, what's going on here? No one's talking about it.
I didn't know. I'm just a citizen. I'm just a bystander observing. Every once in a while, when there's a fire in our community, I'll show up on scene with my cameras and the guys from Station 6. Oh, it's just Conrad. So I'll be there shooting photos or video, doing what I do. But I never think about the responders and the impacts they have. In fact, about 6 or 7 years ago, we had a fatal fire in Emmitsburg, an apartment building. It was just a few weeks before Christmas. And one of our volunteer firefighters, actually several of them, were in the house and they pulled these people out, and one of them was deceased already, one died at the hospital. Yeah. And in that chaotic scene, I was there doing some filming, doing some photography. I snapped a photo of this guy, Josh. And Josh, at the time, was a volunteer. He's a full-time lieutenant down in Virginia. And that photo is kind of haunting because he had just pulled this body out of the house. But me as a citizen, I'm not thinking these guys and gals are really impacted. Never thought about that until I made this film.
And when you went about making this film, were you able to find people who were willing to talk about it? What was the general feelings towards PTSD when you said, this is my new project? Would you be willing to help me? I'm trying to start this cause to help assist and bring awareness to PTSD.
Yeah, so we were filming with the police department down in Texas, and there was a guy there, a detective, a seasoned first responder, a seasoned police officer, detective, had the bomb squad shirt on, tough guy. He did not want to be on camera. Yeah, he had a very powerful story, but he was like, I do not want to be on camera. Finally, my guy there convinced him it's going to be okay. Conrad, he does a good job telling stories. He's not going to exploit you. And so then he said, well, I'll be on camera, but you can't use my name. And it was 2 weeks later he called well, actually, my guy there called and said, "Yeah, Mike said you can use his name." So we had people who were reluctant to talk about because it's a tough subject, especially when they're uncovering this deep, dark thing in their own life.
Right, and your experience is, "Okay, we're gonna share this so it's put on display," but I almost feel that's parallel with what's going on within the firehouse with the story being shared with just your leader or friend. There's a reluctancy to even share or talk about it. So, addressing that and finding new ways to address it, it's so important whatever setting you're within.
Yeah. Well, the firehouse is known for the dinner table talk, and they often have these dark stories, dark humor that comes out, but I think a lot of those conversations don't really address what's really going on personally. I'm not gonna come and admit that I'm drinking a pint every night because what's that gonna do? They're gonna "You got a problem, you gotta take some time off." Well, if I would be honest and just say, "Hey, I'm doing that," Johnny across the table is probably gonna say, "Yeah, I'm having a problem too." And perhaps if they would start talking about it, then they would be able to get the help that they need. But in the meantime, they're going on calls, not well.
Mhm. Did you see any of that, or
Absolutely.
do you have any examples of how PTSD can affect firefighter performance?
Yeah, sure. So Maddie in our film tells a story. He had some really dark things happen in his life and on scenes and even outside of the fire community. He was in a really bad spot at one point, and he was a paramedic firefighter in Anaheim, and he was in his bunk room one day, and the tones went off, and his buddy had to come get him out of bed, and he couldn't get out of bed. He says, "I am not able to mentally, physically get out of bed and go respond to this call." He couldn't do it, and from that point, he had to go get professional help. So it really dramatically impacted him because he was not well, and he was hiding it, and now he was suffering, struggling, and that was a breaking point for him.
Sure, and that's a pretty extreme example, but is there any other ways that it can present that aren't so dramatic that
Oh,
maybe
sure.
somebody is pushing under the table because the issue's so small and nobody's noticing? I don't even
Yeah,
notice myself.
yeah. Some of the symptoms of PTSD are lack of sleep or you're having trouble sleeping. You have nightmares, and perhaps you also find yourself with a very short fuse. And you're reacting, perhaps overreacting to little things that happen at home, especially at home. At home, our families tend to be more forgiving and they absorb the brunt of our stuff sometimes. And so sometimes those things, if you're struggling with that, you're reacting to things at home, you're maybe spending money that you shouldn't be spending money on, and you're doing things to compensate for because really a lot of PTSD is pain, is a reaction to pain, whether it's psychological or even physical pain. That can be a reaction to that. And so if you are perhaps you're dipping into the liquor cabinet more often than not, perhaps or even experimenting with some medications that you shouldn't be diving into. And so some of those things can affect your performance on the job. And so if you're up late the night before drinking and you need to show up at 7 o'clock and you're on for 24, what's going to happen now? And you're now having withdrawals come 3 or 4 o'clock and you're wishing for that you had a flask under your pillow. So you're thinking about that and you're not thinking about what am I doing here to perform to do my job.
Absolutely, and with lives on the line, it's almost like going to work isn't just going to work. You have to
Yeah.
be 100% all of the time
Yep.
with the critical situations you're responding to and the
Yeah.
people that are relying on you, not only on the other side of the response, but on your team as well.
On your team. Yeah, your people who depend on you to be your backup when you're in that critical area. You know, if you're going into a house fire, you wanna make sure everybody on that team is gonna be in the best at peak performance, physically, mentally, and all the things.
So, if I was a firefighter and I'm listening in and I'm like, "Hey, my buddy or my captain or my probie is they're showing signs that they're talking about in this episode." What is the best way that you would approach someone that is showing signs of
Yeah,
PTSD?
yeah. Well, I think the first thing is, does your agency have peer support? If you have peer support, go talk to peer support because they're more than likely trained on how to handle these things. A lot of departments have programs. Well, some of the better departments that I know of have programs where you can just go talk to a counselor and no one needs to know. Your captain doesn't need to know. You're just talking to a counselor. This one program down in Texas, they're amazing and they provide 100% support. Not nearly everybody has that. But if you find your buddy, it's just having an honest conversation. Hey, what's going on? And don't give me the I'm fine. Dive deeper, press on because I would rather have a conversation and make you mad at me for digging than to come have to speak at your funeral. I'd rather have that serious conversation and get that process rolling to get you help.
That's such a powerful thing, and relying on your fellow firefighters to address the situation is a strong tactic, and not only having the self-awareness to address it yourself, but knowing that the people around you are educated is a strong tool that each fire department, in my opinion, should have in their toolbox.
Absolutely.
So, how can you best create a culture and environment to address PTSD within the firehouse?
It's very doable. I've seen it happen. I've seen it in places where it's a normal thing to talk about our feelings, to talk about what's going on in our life. And it takes courage because that's not normal. I mean, an old timer told me how we dealt with it back in the day was suck it up. Well, we see where that got us, right? So having those conversations on a daily basis is saying, hey, we're going to talk about these things. We were just on a call where there was an infant or there was some kind of tragedy. Let's talk about that. Let's not put it under the rug, but let's actually talk about it and let's see, okay, yeah, that really bothered me. And let's have those open conversations and make it the norm. I think the more fire personnel can have those open conversations and realize we're all human beings. We all have feelings and emotions, and those kind of things are going to affect a human being. If they don't affect you, maybe there's something else wrong, more serious. So I think creating a culture where it's okay to talk about these things is so vital and so important to have a healthy firehouse.
Absolutely. And if there is a firefighter listening to this and they know, hey, I have these signs, I have these symptoms, what is the next step for them to go and seek help? Is it going and talking to a friend, or are they supposed to go and talk to a professional? How do they know?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it would be important to, at some point, find a professional, but you want to find one who is culturally competent, who understands the firehouse mentality, who understands the culture of firefighters. And there's plenty of those around. There's resources available where there are. In fact, my friend Todd down in Texas, he just for example, he kept poking me about going to see a therapist. And just because I'm around all this stuff, I'm hearing all these stories, so one day he sent me a list of all the culturally competent therapists in Maryland, and he said, "Pick one and just call them." So I did. So I'm seeing a therapist. I'm proud to say that. I'm not ashamed of it. So I think the first step is, yeah, look for that. And you might need to go to your EAP, what's available there. EAP is the Employee Assistance Program that most agencies have around the country. And sometimes EAP has a bad name. Understand that. If you don't trust your EAP, then there are people that you can reach out to across the country where you can say, "Hey, I need help. Can you find me somebody?" My buddy Matty Fiorenza, he would be happy to take any phone call from any firefighter anywhere in the world.
And once the firefighter does take that first step and seeks out the help, makes that large step, has that conversation, what does it look like after that? Are we just continuing to have conversations? What does that next future step look like?
I think the biggest thing is to get those tools that you can work with. You wouldn't go to the fire scene without the right tools. Right? And so when you go see a counselor or you go into a program, you are going to be given tools to use. Perhaps it's knowing how to breathe, how to do deep breathing, and how to regulate your nervous system through breathing. Perhaps it's doing new types of exercises that will help regulate you. So you're given all these tools and then to practice using those tools. Whether I know it's not really a manly thing to say, but do some yoga, There's a fire chief that's in my film from CAL FIRE, and he said, "If you'd have told me 3 years ago that I was doing yoga, I'd have laughed in your face." And today he does it on a regular basis. In fact, he teaches it. And they've taken this to the academy in CAL FIRE and teach this so all the new recruits know how to do this. And so they go to the fire scene with these tools, and they're able to utilize these tools to keep themselves regulated, to keep themselves healthy. And so it's a, spirit, soul, and body. You think, what I put into my body, what I put into my mouth affects every part of me. So learning how to eat properly, proper nutrition, proper hydration. I mean, if you're sitting and playing video games all day, that's not the healthiest thing. To you listen to podcasts, watch YouTube videos that are building you up. Create this path for your life that moves you in the direction you want to go. There's an author that once said, "Our life moves in the direction of our strongest thoughts." And so if I'm always thinking negative, my life's going to move toward the negative. But if I put positive things into my mind and I focus on that and I focus on where I want to go and move my life, I'm going to start moving in that direction.
I really like that. So, we're talking about an industry where exposure to stressful situations, trauma is a daily basis. Every call could be the worst. What can firefighters do with this inevitable that they're facing? What steps can they take to promote and protect firefighter mental health or health amongst each other?
I think first it starts with leadership and it starts with the chief. If the chief sets the tone for the department, then it trickles down to the captain who runs the shift. But if they are not on board, then it's going to be very difficult for those on the rank and file to find that good spot. So I think it starts with leadership. And everywhere I go across the country, I have been told that we have a problem with leaders stepping up and taking on this role as a chief mental health officer, if you would, to really make sure their people are doing the right thing and that they are healthy. And I'll speak about this till the day I die. It starts and ends with leadership. Leaders have to step up. They have to take some classes, learn what the best practices are to get your people into a healthy spot. So a couple months ago, we had a screening of our film PTSD 911 down in Mississippi, and a fire chief came to our screening. And he came up to me afterwards, a bigger guy, arms folded. He was like, "I didn't think I had a problem until I saw your movie." And what's come out of that is now he has seen the need to bring people into his department to teach mental health and wellness for all of his guys and gals. He is now doing that on a regular basis. He's starting a support group for first responders because he sees how the job has impacted him over the course of his career and how it's going to impact all these younger people coming up. And so he's now setting the pace for doing the right thing. And I challenged him on this. I said, "When you were a young firefighter," I said, "where did you want to be? You want to be on the nozzle, right? You want to be first one in on that nozzle. And guess what? Everybody's going to follow you in." So I said, "Well, now you're the chief. You can be the first one on the nozzle when it comes to mental health and wellness, and they're going to follow you. They're going to follow your example. And so if leadership does the right thing, the whole firehouse is going to follow."
It just takes one person to set the tone and taking the lead for others to follow.
Yeah. And there's plenty of people out there who will gladly help you learn these things. In fact, that fire chief, I connected him to a captain out of Orange County, California, who's now retired, and he started a support group. And so these two people talk. I mean, here's a Mississippi fire chief and a Orange County, California captain, two very different types of communities, and they're working together to make these things happen to better the company down in Mississippi.
Absolutely. So if I'm a leader at my fire department and I'm listening to this podcast and I want to take that next first step to addressing PTSD within my fire department, what do you recommend is the next step for me?
That's a great question. I think, first of all, surround yourself, learn as much as you can. Listen to my podcast, the First Responder Wellness Podcast. We have great numbers of people on there, leadership people on there who teach these things and who can inform you as to what to do. There are other programs out there that are available across the board that we can bring people into your firehouse, into your city to teach mental health and wellness. Put on a mental health and wellness symposium, put on a summit. And we've done that several times around the country where In fact, I'm going to one in a couple of the days where we have a whole department, a whole community of first responders coming together to learn about these things. So find a first responder conference to go to, and you can learn these things. There's plenty of resources out there to learn how to manage these.
Sure. So it sounds like you've talked to quite a few different fire departments. Do you have any advice for any firefighters that are listening out there right now?
Yeah, first of all, know that you're not alone. If you're struggling with your sleep, if you're struggling with the alcohol use, if you're struggling in any way, you are not alone. It's normal because what you're doing is so important and what you're doing is impacting your life. And so my encouragement is to find someone that to walk through this time with. Find someone that who you can walk with and then ask for help. That's the hardest thing that any first responder does is to raise their hand and says, "I need help." You respond to people who need help. They call 911 and you respond. Well, it's sometimes it's time for you to call 911. I mean, figuratively here and ask for help. So reach out, ask for help, ask your buddy, ask someone in your department, ask a friend, but just ask because when you ask, you put in motion a process that will lead you to a better place. But you have to first be willing to ask.
Absolutely.
I just think that for me as a citizen with first responders, it's a huge privilege and an honor for me. And I want to clarify that I'm not a therapist. I'm not a medical professional. I'm not a psychiatrist, even though I have a degree in psychology. I'm not a professional in that area. I'm a filmmaker, storyteller. But it's an honor for me to work with first responders. I think first responders are the keys to our communities. They keep our communities healthy and safe. And my dream and my goal is to help first responders be healthy so that they can continue to do the job and they can work their whole career and not have to end their career short, but be healthy, to retire healthy and to thrive even in their retirement. Because when you put off the uniform and you step out of that role, you got to have something to step into and to be healthy in that. And but my goal for what I'm doing with the podcast, with my film, is to help first responders be healthy, to live healthy, thrive.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. This is just such an important topic to address, especially in this industry. So I really appreciate you bringing light and bringing a voice to it. And I hope that it helps at least just one person out there and this podcast is a success.
Amen. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.